Hello and welcome to the second episode of Vikings with Loki. How are you doing, Loki?
I'm doing great. How you doing, brother?
I can't complain too much. It's raining, but what can you do? Today, Loki is going to inform us of what happens when Vikings invade the British Isles. And do better than the French. I mean, just. All right. Well, with that, Loki, I'll let you take that over while all the British people are laughing and the French people are going, "What the fuck?"
You can't really start talking about the invasion of the British Isles without touching on the Viking hero Ragnar Lothbrok. Now, Ragnar Lothbrok, according to legend, was a Danish and Swedish king. Old Norse poetry of the Viking Age, the Icelandic sagas. According to these, Ragnar distinguished himself by conducting raids on the British Isles. Supposedly, he was the first to do this to the British Isles and the Holy Roman Empire during the 9th century. He's in Norse legends. According to the legendary sagas, the tale of Ragnar's sons, the saga about certain ancient kings, Ragnar's father was a legendary king. Ragnar was a legendary king, and his sons were all legendary kings. Now, supposedly, he was the first. There is almost nothing written from this time because the Vikings didn't write anything down. So the first raid that we are 99% sure happened was in the late 8th century. And these were raids on monasteries, churches. Now, I don't know if you want to ask, why churches, Loki?
Well, yeah, I mean, you would ask why churches, but I know the answer, so that's why I didn't ask it. But yeah, why would they hit up churches? I mean, they're just little wooden buildings with wooden pews and a book in it. Why would you hit up the church?
A lot of these monasteries in the British Isles were on coast. They were right next to the coast. This was purposeful because they didn't want to be around civilization. They wanted to be out on their own. They did not want to be influenced by civilization. They wanted their isolation. So they built these churches next to the coast. And when the Vikings landed, that was the first thing they found and the first thing they hit. And lucky for them, these churches had plenty of gold and objects that could be taken. Oh yeah, gold, because tithe. You're tithing.
No. The churches are poor and
No. The monasteries had money, lots of money, and lots of valuable objects that the Vikings could just take with them. So they were portable. So let's say that one of these monasteries had a cross made out of gold in their church. Well, they just take it. They just take it. They wanted to be isolated. They had money to buy food. They had money to a lot of these monasteries had scribes that would copy Bibles and write Bibles. So they'd take a Bible and they would copy it in another Bible. Everything is handwritten. There is no mass producing anything. So you've got half a dozen scribes writing Bibles, copying from one Bible to another. This is how everything got transferred back then. And they had to live. They had to have money. They had to have food. They had to have clothing. They had to have whatever they needed. And all the tithing for the church went to these monasteries and went to other areas that we can touch on at some other time when we're not talking about Vikings. But these were the immediate targets. So I do know that in 840, that is 840 for everybody out there, 35 Viking ships landed on the coast of the British Isles and raided. And they were raiding mainly monasteries and churches. Some villages, yes, but this was a big thing for them because money, silk, gold, silver, spices. What the Vikings liked to do is they would send in traders. So you'd have a Viking that would come in and it set up trade between his home and England.
Yeah.
Then they would go back and they would tell their buddies, their Viking raiding buddies, hey, guess what? I know about this whole stretch of land over here that has all this stuff and nobody's there to defend it. And the Vikings, okay, well, you don't know us and we don't know you, so we'll just keep it that way. We don't know each other. You go back to trading and making money. They did this a lot. They didn't just do this to the British Isles. They did it. Yeah. They did it everywhere. So it didn't matter where they went. This is how they did business, and it worked. So for 70 years, the Vikings were raiding the British Isles, and it was in 865, I believe. I might not be exact on the date, but I'm pretty sure it was 865 when Ragnar Lothbrok, or Lodbrok, however you want to say it, pronounce it, write it, fell into the hands of King Aella of Northumbria. Now, the Vikings had been raiding, like I said, for 70 years by then. And the English were tired of it. This was the great heathen army. This was the heathens that would raid their churches, steal their gold, raid their villages. They would do anything and everything for money. And Alar made a very, very big mistake. He threw Ragnar into a snake pit.
Uh-oh.
And killed him. And Ragnar's sons used this as a recruitment tool to basically get everyone in Scandinavia to join them and do what no one outside of England had ever done to England, which was declare war on the English. You had a lot of infighting in England. So you had this kingdom, you had the kingdom of Mercia, you had the kingdom of Wessex, you had all these different kingdoms in England kind of fighting each other here and there, working out deals. The great heathen army was there to take them all down.
Yeah.
And they started...
And it's not like armies of today. Like, you know, they weren't, you know, they didn't have bases all over the place. It would just be a castle here, a castle there, and that's the fortresses were the castles. And
they might have
called a standing army.
They might have a watchtower, just to watch the coast. They might have something like that. But when Aella got word that the Vikings were coming to get revenge, he just marched out on the field with his itty bitty titty army and thought, we're good. We're going to completely destroy the heathens. The Vikings don't have any kind of unity. They have no battle tactics. Aella treated them like they were mindless savages that couldn't work together in an army. And he was very mistaken.
Yeah. It's like, well, that in England had always been had been used to being the big dog on campus. Nobody's going to attack England.
That's right. So the army in 867, this was 2 years after the death of Ragnar Lodbrok, they captured York. They immediately came in and captured York. Aella tried to get the support of the other kingdoms, and he did get some support, but he tried to retake York, and he was unsuccessful. After that battle, and this is something that is recorded in legend, after the Vikings captured Aella, they performed what is called the Blood Eagle.
Okay.
Do you know, for anybody out there okay, so for anybody out there who does not know what a blood eagle is, This is a special form of ritual for either the worst of the worst or someone who wants to try and regain their honor and get to Valhalla.
Okay.
Okay, so according to the skaldic poetry, it's mentioned twice in the sagas. In both cases, they are placed in a prone position. Their ribs are severed from the spine with a sharp tool. That means that they open up the person's back and they cut the ribs from the spine.
Ow.
Their lungs are pulled through the opening to create a pair of wings. Hence the name Blood Eagle. Now, if you could do this, if you could survive this without crying out, you were worthy of entering Valhalla. If you were doing this to an enemy as a punishment, this was the worst way to die.
Yeah, I would say yeah, that sucks. Do they at least get to go to Valhalla if they don't cry out, which is not going to happen?
If they don't cry out and scream, they're worthy of entering Valhalla. Now, one of Ragnar's sons, Ivar the Boneless, is the one who captured King Ayla. And he is supposedly the one that did this to Ayla.
Oh, wow.
And this is, again, in one of the Eddas, The Tale of Ragnar's Sons.
Yeah.
And the translation for this was, and Ayla's back had the one who dwelt Ivar with eagle York cut. What that means is, and Ivar, the one who dwelt at York, had Ayla's back cut with an eagle.
Yikes.
Meaning they performed the blood eagle on. Now, there are other accounts. Another one said that Sigurd is the one who did this, one of Ragnar's other sons. It's debatable whether this is historically fact or this is something that they threw in there.
Yeah. Let's liven this up a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And they had a tendency to do that. They did.
Because, just like, Ivan the Impaler,
and these are all passed down. These are all passed down stories. So these were told verbally until the point that the Vikings started to write things down. So you can imagine how long this tale had passed from person to person before they actually wrote it down. We're talking generations of verbally passing on this story. Any amount of information could have been changed.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. But not only that, but you state, this person who wronged us was war eagled. The next person who thinks that they're going to wrong them, may think once or twice or three times about this idea.
Yes. Yes. Right? And Ragnar was a hero. We're talking, he was a king and he was a hero, not only because of who he was, but because of who his family was. Some tales say he's the first one that sailed to England. He was the first one to raid England, that he led his people on that quest to find a new land to raid. Whether that is true or not, that's completely up to you. But there was also stories that he was a descendant of Odin and Thor. That his family were direct descendants of Odin and Thor. So he was seen as a godlike hero to his people.
Yeah.
That is why when Ayla killed him, when Ayla did what he did, he gave Ragnar's sons everything they needed to bring all of the tribes in Scandinavia together to go and raid England and to basically declare war. The Vikings didn't just go to war. The Vikings wanted to eat. They wanted to, I don't know if you want me to cuss on here.
Oh, that's fine.
The Vikings wanted to eat, they wanted to fuck, and they wanted to raid. So money, passion, fame, food, get through the winter. Everything was about living with these guys.
Yeah.
It wasn't about war. You went to war when you had to, when you had no other choice, and that was the way it was. That's when you went to war. This was the last thing England needed. So Ayla killing Ragnar was like killing their greatest hero, and all it did was make them all want to go over there and burn, rape, pillage, conquer.
Yeah.
It changed the game.
It had the opposite effect on, that happened a lot in history where, oh, well, I'll teach them a lesson. Yeah, you may not want to do that, right? Because, dealing with, each sect of the Vikings is one thing. But now you went and united them all. Now you're done, right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've united them all and you've given them all a common enemy.
Yes, common cause.
This would go beyond the way they traded, because they would almost graft themselves into a society. Like I said, traders would show up in England, Viking traders, people setting up trade routes, and slowly you'd get some mixing of cultures. This was huge because suddenly, after all this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more on another episode of this. After all this, you have a Viking as king of England.
Yeah.
It's no longer, well, keep the heathens at bay. It's that the heathens now run your country.
Yeah, this isn't good.
And the heathens are setting up camp. They are setting up life. This melded the Saxons and the Norse. This was huge, and a lot of ancestry today can be traced back to Norse and Saxon, basically them merging, and it would affect the Vikings. This isn't just one way, because eventually a lot of the Scandinavians, a lot of the Vikings are going to accept Christianity.
Yeah, and just settle down,
and settle down and become this changed everything. So them starting to raid the coast of Britain led to so much history, all because they decided, well, we're going to go and we're going to raid in this other land. We're going to go to Britain. We're going to go to London. We're going to go to the British Isles, and we're going to raid. Everything changed because of this.
Well, yeah, because they basically went from, by the end of this saga, they go from just doing hit and runs to we hit and we stayed, which probably was a culture shock for them too, because they're used to hitting and then going home. Take your shit and go home. Whereas this is take your shit and stay, which is a little bit different. A little different than just hit and run and go.
But his sons, Ragnar's sons, have a huge influence on history. His son's sons, because of all of this, because of the raiding, it's going to globally change the world. History of the world was changed considerably because of a bunch of drunk Scandinavians that decided they're going to go out and they're going to raid the British Isles.
Yeah.
It doesn't get better than that to leave your mark on history.
Absolutely. It's like, although, one of these days we're going to have to get into, where, like, we kind of touched on it on the first one, but also, where some of these silly myths, like the horns on the helmet and that kind of shite, it's just like, no. But they had ships, but they weren't majorly navy, because you wouldn't have they weren't outfitted with cannon or anything. But then again, not many ships of the day were. They'd rather fight on land than in water.
There's a really, speaking of that, before, because I know we're going to run out of time, but since you brought that up, last talk we had, we compared them to the Romans, to the Spartans, to the Greeks. The Vikings would use a platform with a big nail. You're talking about a big nail, almost like, it looked like a big tooth. Think of a big, like, dragon tooth, really huge dragon tooth. And what they would do is they would have that plank, and they would get next to an enemy ship, and they'd use that against the ship to make sure that the ship wasn't going anywhere, that it would stay side by side, and then they'd just walk over to the other ship and fight. So they'd be fighting on the ships. This is how they fought battles on ships. Yeah. Yeah. The Romans did the exact same thing, and the Greeks did the exact same thing. So again, it's not
like naval warfare that we think of, with guns and, 200 meters away. This is up close, personal, and hi, how are you doing?
Exactly.
Yeah. But so we'll end it there. And we'll maybe next episode or the going forward, we'll kind of maybe look at the transition between, the rating, because I think we glossed over a lot of like the rating. And one thing I'm always curious of, especially with you pointing out that they'd send the traders. Did the British ever pick up on this? Like, this dude comes into town and starts trading with us, and then next thing we know, we got these assholes.
No, because it would be years. It would be years before they got information back home. So let's say that you went in, you started trading, you set up a trade, you've got people moving goods back and forth. This took time. Because you either had to bring it over on a boat or you had to do it by land, by cart.
Yeah.
So this would all take time. Eventually, something would happen. But it's been so long. It might be a year. It might be over a year. It might be 2 years that you're not the one that immediately gets a finger pointed at you.
No, it's the new guy in town, right?
It's the new guy in town. Or it's nobody. They never figured it out. The Chinese didn't even figure it out. So they did this with China, too. They did the same thing with China. They did it in China. They did it in the Middle East. They did it all over. This was their way of, they had the biggest trading influence in the world at the time.
Yeah.
A bigger trading influence. Network. That's right. Than Rome did before it. Yeah. That's something for a bunch of good old boys in Scandinavia. Oh, yeah.
All right. With that, I will say thank you, Loki. And
thank you.
Till next time, all. Skål.
Skål.